I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're met today, the Miccosukee, Seminole and Timuacan people, and the Wurundjeri people of my hometown of Melbourne, and pledge to increase and lift the involvement that we give those people in the stories that we tell, the way that we build new experiences. My name's Joel. I'm an assistant professor at Texas A&M, pretty new. We have a brand new college of performance, visualization and fine art, and a lot of what I'm going to tell you today is about my practice-based research to try and get to grips with some of the new technology that we're using, which I think will have a lot of overlap with some of the stuff that we're doing here. The series 1899 on Netflix uses a unique example of virtual production. I'm going to talk a lot about virtual production here. Some of it I'll try to cover the minutiae, exploring what it is, but there'll be a bit that might be not unfamiliar to you. For those who are, it'll be a bit of covering that kind of stuff. This is a stage used in the virtual production setup in a German studio to shoot this series that a lot of it's set on a boat, but also in the insides of a boat. An LED screen surrounds a stage. It's been used on some other TV series that you know about. But this one's slightly different and innovative in that the stage can move, which allows a new level of innovation in the way that the director can change the set that's displayed on this LED screen and connect it with the set pieces, the real world set pieces. This is the nature of virtual production, which I want to investigate today. There are some fascinating parts in this series that help me to think about ways to innovate the use of these LED atmospheres that we call virtual production that happen inside the actual script. And this dreamlike sequence, the main character, or one of the main characters, seems to be peeling back the actual content of the screen to reveal a metal kind of surface behind it. If you understand what I'm talking about, screen-based sets, this is quite bizarre and interesting, and we'll come back to it. So what is virtual production? My question as a teacher, as a practitioner of new media experiences. Well, Weta Studios in the virtual production field guide said, oh, it's where physical, I could do the accents, where physical and digital worlds meet. And I question that. And that's the focus of today. This new technology exists for us to transplant actors and directors into a completely immersive world. It's supposed to be the blending of games and the attractions industry. That's how it was sold to me. That's my new job. But nowhere I've read have the attractions industry been cited in it. Okay, so if we think about it as a place where the physical and digital worlds meet, that's kind of interesting, because if you've been on a virtual production set and you're the actor, you're supposed to be able to immerse yourself, be on the boat, be in the desert. But there's this thing called the frustum. The frustum is the area that is calculated to give parallax vision, to give you a 3D world behind the actor. And it only actually renders in the area behind you, in the area that the camera captures. I'm being a bit divisive in the way I describe it, but if you know better, then shush. But there's this sort of rendered environment that really only appears behind the actor's back. So to truly experience it, you sort of have to be there. Now, Umarada Katrina has written a lovely sort of, there's not a lot of writing, but she's written this lovely kind of like investigation of what virtual production is. So we know what it is. It's a big screen, you stand in front of it, you do that TV show that we all know about. But what is it really? What is it as a medium? How does it affect us? How can we innovate in it? And how might it be useful? So she says, to put it merely, virtual production, we simulate not just narrative surroundings, but on some level, the circumstances of filmmaking. So the technology really helps us, but it helps us to develop something that cinematographers, filmmakers, directors already had kind of pre-planned in their heads. So I'm trying to find out, just push the boundaries of this and define what this approach is. If we look at scenography, this study of the holistic scene design, we have Pamela Howard's What is Scenography? And I'm skimming over a lot of big ideas really quickly. She talks about space, direction, text, research, composition, performers and spectators, and scenography being the combination of these things. If you've studied theatre design, you would know a lot more about this. Today I want to look a little bit at direction, performers and spectators, and the space, and how those things align interestingly in virtual production, but where this idea and this concept for virtual production came from. And it's going to be a lot about attractions. So, Jodie Nelson-Tabor is an interesting person in the industry. She writes a lot about it as an evolving technology, and when we think about cinema technology and you read and you follow trends like virtual reality and 4D cinema and IMAX, cinema studies people have tended to be a bit supremacist about it, saying that their new technology or their new approach is, revolutionary. But there's a lot of interesting writing that says, no, this is part of a long trajectory of investigation with media and stuff. Anyway, Jodie Tabor says, really this is just an extension of rear projection. And that gets us into a great sort of arc looking at where this idea of, projecting behind actors and creating new spatial immersion might come from. So it's obviously something that's used in cinema a lot and really inventively. And if you're not a special effects person, it's used in really subtle and obvious ways. But it also harks back to the origins of projected media with the Magic Lantern. And if you're interested in connecting some of those very earliest projection media, screen media, to what we do now, Oliver Grau's a great one to read and look at, and he talks in his book, Into the Belly of the Image, historical aspects of virtual reality. He talks about the connection between virtual reality and turn-of-the-century media, even 2-century-old media. The cinema of attractions is a crucial idea. It's a very popular idea if you haven't heard about it. It's a big hitting ticket in film theory. Tom Gunning talks about a reinvestigation of cinema as being part of a trajectory, which I really like, which is a trajectory of attractions. That what we experience in the cinema doesn't just come from the early days of photography, but it comes from the sort of work that we all do here and have done for over a century. If we think about synchronizing a screen and an environment with a text, an idea, we can look at Hale's tours. The use of projection media in very specifically designed spaces to connect you with the screen media. So in the case of these railway examples, you're watching a train ride on cinema, but you place yourself inside a train carriage. And in some of these railway experiences, the railway would rattle and move and synchronize in many ways with the vision on the screen. So it's a very early example of synchronized, or you might say a virtual link between the physical and the set and the text. Virtual production at the amusement park. Like a lot of what I do is looking at these new technologies and then sort of, you make your own links in the history that you know. And there's a place that was built at the turn of the century at the World's Fair in Buffalo in 1901. It was a set of concessions. I've talked about it on this very stage many times. You keep coming back to it, and you might find that a lot of us do that. We come back to one kind of seminal kind of moment that's fascinated us. And it was one of the earliest examples of a mechanized, immersive experience, the trip to the moon. It went on to become Trip to the Moon Ride at Luna Park and themed Luna Park with its name. But what was fascinating is that 123 years ago, and you can read the patent, they built a ship-based experience with immersive painted screens wrapped all the way around it. So you really felt like you're on a boat. You can see in the diagram on the left. And a different shot of the virtual production set from 1899, the series. And really they're trying to do the same thing, and they're really continuing a tradition of immersion that's lasted that long, where you're trying to use a device that gives people the feeling of movement. But in the case of the Trip to the Moon ride, you've got a whole bunch of people experiencing this sort of vista, which was a flight above Buffalo. And there's a lot written about it, but it was a boat-like experience for people in the attractions industry. And the boat would rotate, and the panoramic scenes would rotate around the boat as well. So there are a lot of different techniques that even came together, even in 1901, to create these kind of experiences, one of which was obviously trompe l'oeil or illusionistic painting. And in one of the scenes from 1899, the actor actually climbs out of the screen in exactly the way that's depicted in this early example of illusionistic painting from the 17th century. So we've seen this sort of stuff across cinema. It's come and gone. There's a wonderful series of works that's held at UT in Austin by Karen Manis, who talk about the way that set paintings used to work was to fool the point of view. And I spent a lot of time writing this as a larger chapter and interviewed some of the people who are involved in the attractions industry, and to ask them about the process of building attractions and how it might relate to this idea of like immersion and how they thought about virtual production as a way of completing this immersive space. David Cobb said, well, it's not so much that we build the whole space. It's not as important, but it is important to think about the point of view that you attract the eye to. In my previous writing, I've written about rides and talked about this extensively, but it does add more clarity to this idea that we're not actually building a 360-degree environment, but we are thinking about how to maneuver the audience's eyes, whether that be through a TV or in a ride, to a specific part where we can then complete the illusion. David talks in quotes throughout my chapter about Pirates of the Caribbean, and it's a great example of attracting the eye to slim moments or frustrums of vision that are complete. When we look at synchronized media, it's been happening in cinema in innovative ways in your relationship between the director and the director, the actor, and the audience yourself. This incredible piece of invention called Zoptic Effects by the DOP Zoran Perisic. He wanted to create the zoom that Superman goes through. So he created a machine that would synchronize a projector and the camera and the actor together to give you that feeling of Superman zooming through the sky. I'll let you ponder on how difficult that is. The first example of synchronized spatial stuff and preconceived media, you could argue with me over the break, but one of them was a tour of the universe in Toronto in 1985. So it's a big deal to have sort of media and a moving kind of digital space, but really it's a Hales tour from many, many decades before. That then was used to create, that similar technology used to create the Star Tours. In terms of 3D graphics, which is what we see in virtual production, one of the earliest examples of eye point media, where the media is actually changing to suit the eye point, the perspective or the parallax of the viewer, was in Toy Story Mania. And I interviewed, I'm skipping through this pretty quickly, I interviewed Michael Libby, who's the CEO of World Builder, who I think has been talking across this conference, and you've met him maybe through the TEA. He works specifically in using virtual production to plot out attractions design. We see these things coming full circle on themselves, but I know that virtual production plays a big role in what we do. And he said, in this long kind of quote, that, so he said that it really helps us to both plan, but also helps us to create experiences that go far beyond and, like gives us an amazing scope. And I know we already do that, but I wanted to write this down so that cinema and those in cinema realize that we have a lot of ownership and we've experimented a lot with this technology. But it also helps me to understand some of the elements that we can continue to think about when we're building 3D or virtual media into spaces, whether they be public space, retail environments, or cinema, or directly into attractions. Some of the things I've realised is, you've got to obviously integrate your media into physical props. You want to think about your audience's position in the media and synchronise vision to create engagement. Thank you.